I heard my name whispered in perfect harmony at 2:17 a.m., and I knew I should have never come to St. Magdalene's alone. My name is Sarah Chen, and I'm a 24-year-old graduate student studying historical preservation at the University of Georgia. What I'm about to tell you happened 3 weeks ago, and I still wake up in cold sweats hearing those voices. I need to get this out there, because if you're ever driving through rural Georgia and see the burned-out shell of St. Magdalene's Lutheran Church, please just keep driving. It started as research for my thesis on post-war reconstruction in the South. I'd been combing through county records when I found mention of a fire at St. Magdalene's on December 15, 1945. The basic facts were simple enough. A Christmas Eve rehearsal had gone late. Someone knocked over a candle, and the wooden church went up like kindling. What made it tragic was that the choir, all 15 members, had been trapped when the old oak doors warped and jammed in the heat. The newspaper clipping was brief, almost dismissive. Local church fire claims 15 lives. But something about the sparse details nagged at me. Why would they practice so late? Why couldn't anyone escape through the windows? And why, when I drove past the ruins a month later, did locals in the nearby town of Millbrook refuse to talk about it? The church sat about 8 miles outside Millbrook, down a dirt road that Google Maps insisted didn't exist. I'd found it by following hand-drawn directions from a 1980s county survey. The building was exactly what you'd expect from a rural Lutheran church. Built in the 1920s, simple white clapboard siding, a modest steeple, arched windows, except half of it was charred black. The roof caved in on the right side where the fire had been worst. I parked my Honda Civic in the overgrown gravel lot as the sun was setting, casting long shadows through the skeletal remains of what had once been the choir loft. The plan was simple. Take some photos, measure the foundation from my architectural drawings, and get out before dark. I'm not superstitious, but there's something unsettling about burned buildings. They hold onto their trauma differently than other ruins. The front doors were gone, leaving a gaping mouth of an entrance. I stepped inside, my footsteps echoing in the hollow space. The pews were mostly intact on the left side, though warped and discolored. Hymnals still sat on the wooden racks, their pages brittle and brown. I could make out fragments of Christmas carols. Silent Night, Ho Come, All Ye Faithful, songs that had been interrupted mid-verse 79. Years ago, I was photographing the altar area when I heard it the first time. It was faint, so faint I thought it might be wind through the broken windows. But there was no wind that evening. The air was perfectly still, heavy with that pre-storm humidity that makes your clothes stick to your skin. The sound was singing, voices harmonizing in a way that raised goosebumps along my arms. I stood frozen, camera halfway to my face, straining to listen. The melody was familiar, O Holy Night, but the voices seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. They weren't quite right either, like an old recording played through water, distorted and hollow. My rational mind kicked in. Old buildings make sounds, settling foundations, wind through gaps I couldn't see, maybe even acoustics from the highway 8 miles away. I forced myself to keep working, but my hands were shaking as I adjusted my camera settings. That's when I noticed the light. It was subtle at first, just a warm glow emanating from where the choir loft used to be. Not electric, more like candlelight, flickering and golden. I looked up at the collapsed ceiling, expecting to see car headlights from the road. But the angle was all wrong. The light was coming from inside the church. I should have left then. Every instinct screamed at me to pack up my equipment and drive back to Athens. Instead, I found myself walking toward the source of the light, drawn by a curiosity that overrode my common sense. The choir loft had been completely destroyed in the fire, but as I stood beneath where it once was, the singing grew clearer. 15 distinct voices, men and women, blending in harmonies that made my chest ache with their beauty. I could almost make out words. Fall on your knees, oh hear the angel voices. The temperature dropped suddenly, my breath visible in the humid Georgia air. The light above me intensified, and for one impossible moment, I swear I saw them. Figures in 1940s clothing, women in simple dresses, men in dark suits standing in formation, as if the loft still existed. Their mouths moved in silent song, their faces turned upward in rapture. But their eyes were black holes, and smoke rose from their clothing like they were still burning. I stumbled backward, my camera clattering to the floor. The vision lasted maybe 3 seconds before the light vanished, plunging the church back into twilight gloom. The singing stopped so abruptly that the silence felt like a physical blow. I ran. I'm not proud of it, but I left my expensive camera behind and sprinted for my car, gravel spraying as I peeled out of that parking lot. I didn't stop shaking until I was back in my apartment, doors locked, lights blazing. But the story doesn't end there. I spent the next week trying to rationalize what I'd experienced. Stress, sleep deprivation, too much caffeine, anything but the obvious explanation. I threw myself into research, determined to find a logical answer. That's when I discovered the truth about St. Magdalene's fire. Buried in the archives of the Atlanta Constitution, I found a follow-up article from January 1946. The fire investigation had revealed something troubling. The church doors had been locked from the outside, not warped by heat, locked with a chain and padlock that had been found in the ashes, still secured. Someone had trapped those 15 people inside and set the fire deliberately. The article mentioned a suspect, Heinrich Müller, the church janitor who'd been fired 3 weeks before the incident for stealing from the collection plate. Witnesses placed him near the church that night, but he'd fled town before police could question him. The case went cold when his body was found in the Chattahoochee River 6 months later, an apparent suicide. But here's what really made my blood run cold. In Müller's pocket, police found a list, 15 names, the exact same 15 people who died in the fire. I tried to put it out of my mind, but the voices followed me home. Not literally, I'm not talking about supernatural visitation, but I'd wake up at night hearing that harmony, those perfect voices singing Christmas carols in the darkness of my bedroom. I'd catch myself humming "O Holy Night" without realizing it. 2 weeks later, I went back. I told myself it was for my camera, but that was a lie. I needed to understand what I'd witnessed. I needed closure or confirmation, or maybe just proof that I wasn't losing my mind. This time I came prepared: digital recorder, thermal camera, electromagnetic field detector, all the ghost hunting equipment I could borrow from a friend who was into paranormal investigation. If something was happening at St. Magdalene's, I was going to document it properly. I arrived just before sunset, the sky painted in shades of orange and purple that reminded me too much of flames. My camera was exactly where I'd dropped it, somehow undamaged despite a week of Georgia weather. The church felt different this time, expectant, like it had been waiting for my return. I set up my equipment methodically, checking battery levels and storage space. The electromagnetic detector immediately started chirping, not unusual around old electrical systems. Except this church had never been wired for electricity. As darkness fell, the temperature began to drop. My thermal camera showed cold spots throughout the church, areas where the air was 15 to 20 degrees colder than the surrounding space. The spots weren't random, they formed a pattern. Arranged in the exact formation a 15-person choir would stand in. At 9:47 p.m., the singing began again. This time I was ready. I hit record on everything, watching as the electromagnetic detector went haywire, and the thermal camera registered massive temperature fluctuations. The audio picked up the voices clearly, crystal clear. In fact, 15 distinct vocal signatures harmonizing in ways that would make a professional choir jealous. But when I checked the thermal imaging, what I saw made my knees weak. The cold spots weren't empty. They were shaped like people, human silhouettes standing in perfect formation, their body heat registering as negative space against the ambient temperature. As I watched, they moved slightly, swaying with the rhythm of their ethereal song. That's when I heard my name, Sarah, Sarah, Chen. The voices called to me in that same perfect harmony, my name woven into the melody of Silent Night like it belonged there, like they'd been waiting 79 years just to sing it to me. I wanted to run again, but something kept me rooted in place. These weren't malevolent spirits. There was no sense of threat or anger in their presence. They felt grateful, like they'd been trying to tell their story for decades, and I was finally listening. Heilige Nacht, they sang, switching to German. Silent Night, Holy Night. It hit me then. St. Magdalene's was a Lutheran church founded by German immigrants. Heinrich Müller wasn't just a janitor, he was part of the community, someone they'd trusted. His theft from the collection plate wasn't just about money, it was betrayal. The thermal images showed them more clearly now, their negative heat silhouettes gaining definition. I could make out facial features, clothing, even individual expressions of peace and contentment. They weren't trapped here by trauma, they were staying by choice, continuing the Christmas Eve rehearsal that had been so violently interrupted. All is calm. Their voices swelled, filling the ruined church with impossible beauty. All is bright. But then I noticed something else in the thermal imaging. A 16th figure, standing apart from the choir near what had once been the entrance. This one wasn't cold, it burned hot, registering as a bright white silhouette against the camera's heat detection. Unlike the peaceful choir members, this figure radiated aggression, moving in agitated jerks and starts. Heinrich Müller, still here, still watching. The temperature plummeted further as the hot figure began moving toward me. The choir's singing grew urgent, their harmonies shifting to minor keys that spoke of warning and protection. My breath came out in sharp puffs as I fumbled with my equipment, trying to capture everything while fighting the urge to flee. The hot figure stopped maybe 10 feet away from me, and I could feel its attention like a physical weight. Through my viewfinder, I watched as it reached toward me with superheated hands that registered as blazing white. On the thermal display, that's when the choir's voices rose to a crescendo, their protective harmony forming a barrier I could actually see on the thermal camera wall of cold air that pushed the burning figure back. Their song shifted again, and I recognized the melody. A mighty fortress is our God, a Lutheran hymn of protection and divine strength. The hot figure writhed and twisted, but couldn't break through their defensive wall of song. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, it retreated, fading until it disappeared entirely from the thermal imaging. The choir's song softened, returning to the gentle Christmas carols they'd been rehearsing on that December night in 1945. One by one, their cold silhouettes began to fade as well, but not before each one turned toward me in what I can only describe as a bow of acknowledgement. The last voice to fade was a soprano, high and clear and beautiful beyond description. Sleep in heavenly peace, sleep in heavenly peace, then silence, complete, profound silence that felt like a benediction. I packed up my equipment with shaking hands, but this time I wasn't running. I was saying goodbye. The church felt different now, empty, but not abandoned, peaceful, like whatever had kept them here had finally been resolved. I drove home that night with a strange sense of completion, not just for my thesis research, but for something much deeper. Those 15 souls had been trying to tell their story for almost 8 decades, and somehow, I'd been the one to finally hear it. One submitted my recordings to the university's Paranormal Research Department, where they're still being analyzed. The audio is clear enough that several musicologists have identified the specific harmonies and arrangements used by rural Lutheran churches in the 1940s. The thermal imaging has been verified as authentic by multiple independent sources. But honestly, I don't need scientific validation for what I experienced that night. I know what I heard, what I saw, what I felt in that burned-out church. 15 people who died violently, murdered by someone they trusted, choosing to stay together in death to finish what they'd started in life. I finished my thesis on St. Magdalene's, documenting both its architectural significance and its tragic history. The paper was well received, but more importantly, it led to a proper historical marker being placed at the site. 15 names are now engraved in stone, ensuring their story won't be forgotten again. I haven't been back to the church since that second night. I don't need to. Their song is finished now, their story told. But sometimes when I'm working late on other research projects, I'll put on a recording of Silent Night and remember their voices' perfect harmony born from tragedy, beauty emerging from loss. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening to my story. I know how it sounds, believe me, but I also know what I experienced in that ruined church was real. Those voices, those spirits, that inexplicable moment of connection across the boundary between life and death. Have you ever experienced something you couldn't explain? Something that challenged everything you thought you knew about the world? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Because after Magdalene's, I've learned that reality is far stranger and more beautiful than we usually dare to believe. The choir of Magdalene's sang their final song that night, and I was honored to be their audience. Their voices may be silent now, but their harmony lives on in the story I've shared with you. Rest in peace, all 15 of you. Your song was beautiful,